After Rupert Murdoch inevitably dies, who's going to take over the world's largest right-wing media empire? A question whose answer could dramatically change your future Thanksgivings with your family. And that because the owner of News Corp, Fox News, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Post, and hundreds of other newspaper and TV stations in Britain and Australia, he is 93 years old. So likely, we're not going to have to wait too long to see how this succession crisis plays out. But to talk about what will happen, we have to talk about what has happened, starting in 2006. Because that is when Murdoch established his family trust, with him dividing up the financial pie among his 6 children and retaining absolute control over his empire for himself. Right, and the struggle that we're about to get into, it's really not about the money. It's about probably the more important thing, power. Because under the terms of the trust, once Murdoch dies, voting power will then be distributed equally among his 4 oldest children, Lachlan, James, Elizabeth, and Prudence. And the big thing with that, though, is that they are all very different people. Starting off, Lachlan's the furthest right politically and the closest to his father in that respect, which is likely why he's been appointed to chair News Corp for the time being. Then you've got Prudence, the oldest child and only daughter from Murdoch's first marriage, right? I mean, she's the most private and least involved in her father's business. Then you have Elizabeth, a TV entertainment mogul and socialite who capitalized on her last name, but still tried to carve her own path through the business world. And finally, there's James, the youngest of the 4 and seemingly the most liberal, or at least the most moderate. He and his wife are outspoken climate activists. He's donated to the Anti-Defamation League after Charlottesville, and he even donated to and voted for Joe Biden. Yet surprisingly, he is also the most involved in the Murdoch empire alongside his right-wing older brother, Lachlan, with the two actually sharing operating responsibility for the companies from 2015 through 2019. But that year, he left, and then the next year he stepped down from the board of News Corp as well, with him at the time citing disagreements over certain editorial content published by the company's news outlets, which many took as him not being able to stand the network's Trumpification, election denialism, and climate denialism any longer. But despite their differences, all 4 children, even including James, have been considered at one time or another to be the potential heir to the Murdoch throne, which has naturally led to some, we'll call it friendly competition between each of them. Probably most famously showcased during the British phone hacking scandal in 2010, right when Murdoch's tabloids were found to have illegally spied on politicians and celebrities. And since James oversaw News Corp's British operations at the time, Elizabeth reportedly tried to convince her father to fire him and promote her, though she denied that. Also, if you're like, wow, this family drama sounds a little familiar. Like, I don't know, the plot of HBO's Succession. You are not the only one who thought so. In fact, according to court documents obtained by the New York Times, Elizabeth's representative to the family trust saw the episode where, spoiler alert, in case you have not seen the show, skip ahead like 20 seconds. If you didn't do it at this point, it is your fault. The father, Logan Roy, unexpectedly dies, throwing his media empire into turmoil. So Elizabeth's guy reportedly drafted a so-called succession memo meant to avoid a real-life repeat of those fictional events. And in April of last year, reportedly Murdoch's children began secretly discussing a public relations strategy for their father's eventual death. Hell, I mean, it even goes both ways, right? The writers of Succession are open about having taken inspiration from the Murdoch dynasty. Though funny enough, one of Murdoch's ex-wives was barred by her divorce settlement from giving them ideas for the show. So for the question, does art imitate life or does life imitate art? I guess it's both at the same time.
You know what? Sometimes it is a big dick competition.
But one major difference between Logan Roy and Rupert Murdoch is that the real-life media magnate, he actually did choose a successor in the end. And by no means was it a big plot twist, right? It's Lachlan. Of course it's Lachlan.
You're my boy. You're my #1 boy.
But I mean, that's been pretty clear for several years now, but here is where things get messy. Because you see, they are still bound by the terms of the family trust, which gives each child equal voting power after their father dies. That is, unless there's one key exception. Right? Murdoch can legally revise the terms only so long as those revisions are in good faith and in the best interest of his beneficiaries. That including his 3 other children, James, Elizabeth, and Prudence. Which means that he would have to argue that stripping them of their power is actually in their best interest, whether they realize it or not. Or in other words, daddy knows best. And so on their side, Murdoch argued that consolidating power around Lachlan would ensure that the companies remain on their right-wing course, which would keep them commercially viable and therefore financially benefit the less right-wing kids. But on the other side, you had James countering that Fox and News Corp's slide into Trumpism may have actually brought short-term profits, but it threatens the empire's long-term future. And for a while, Prudence and Elizabeth's loyalties, they were a bit more ambiguous, though the Murdoch-Lachlan team thought they smelled betrayal. Right? They reportedly alleged that the daughters participated in a brewing plot by James to launch a coup against Lachlan after Murdoch's death and reel in the empire's right-wing bent, with them pointing there to a meeting that James, Elizabeth, and Prudence had at a hotel in London last year as proof of their alleged scheme. That's why, in a blueprint to revise the family trust fittingly titled Project Family Harmony, Murdoch's and Lachlan's lawyers singled out James as the so-called troublesome beneficiary. But now, the news this week is that the Nevada commissioner tasked with reviewing these conflicting claims has completely shut down Murdoch's proposal to revise the trust, with the commissioner writing in a 96-page opinion that the plan was a carefully crafted charade to permanently cement Lachlan Murdoch's executive roles inside the empire, regardless of the impact such control would have over the company companies or the beneficiaries of the family trust. And specifically there, he concluded that Murdoch and Lachlan acted in bad faith for months, with them then only notifying the other children mere days before a scheduled vote at a special emergency meeting of the trust. Meanwhile, Murdoch and Lachlan had been securing other votes by appointing two very interesting representatives to the trust. First, William Barr, yes, that William Barr, Trump's former attorney general. And second, an unnamed person whose research into the trust consisted of Google searches and YouTube videos about the Murdochs or the fictional family in the show Succession. So now James, Elizabeth, and Prudence have put out a joint statement in response to this news saying, "We welcome Commissioner Gorman's decision and hope that we can move beyond this litigation to focus on strengthening and rebuilding relationships among all family members." But with all that, the war is in no way over yet and probably not even close. Right? And that because the commissioner only weighs the testimony and evidence and submits a recommended resolution to the probate court. Then a district judge has to ratify or reject that recommendation, and of course, that decision can be appealed. And then, of course, even if these legal matters don't work, Lachlan can try other power plays like buying out his sibling shares. So very likely, this is not going to be the end of hearing about juicy, legal, family drama. And hey, best thing of all, you don't even need a subscription to Max for this one. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.